Morning.
Morning all.
Morning.
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 Morning, Bron.
Hiya.
Morning, Stephen.
Good morning, Jane. Chancellor Scullion.
Angela, I think we'll just give another minute for any latecomers to arrive and for Councillor McBride to get back to his seat. Are we live on YouTube at the moment?
Yes, we are live. Yeah.
Right, thank you, Ben.
Morning.
Morning, Joe.
Morning.
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 Hi, morning. I think once Councillor McBride is back, I think we probably have all members that we're expecting.
And here he is on cue. Welcome, Peter. Okay, if we can make a start then, folks. Welcome to all. Angela, first of all, do we have a quorum today?
We do indeed.
Right, jolly good. Apologies for absence then, item 1.
We've received apologies from Andy Clayton, Councillor Hinchcliffe, and also from Councillor Swift and Councillor Panda, for whom Councillor Scullion and McBride are in attendance today.
Thank you, Ben. It is a busy time, even though it's a Friday. It's actually a very busy time. There's a lot going on at the moment. Okay, in terms of items on the agenda today, item 2, are there any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests?
No.
I have my own to be recorded as in the previous meeting as a beneficiary of the West Yorkshire Pension Fund. Okay, no others. Exclusion of the press and public, item 3. I believe there are no items which require exclusion of the public. Angela, can you confirm?
Correct.
That?
Correct.
Okay, next item is the minutes of the last meeting.
Great.
Oh, no. We lost you briefly there, Councillor Scullion.
Oh. Is there anything which needs to be amended in the minutes, or do we believe there are a true and correct record?
Move them, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Lee, thank you very much. Okay. I noticed a couple of typos, but those who know me know I'm a bit...
Oh, we seem to have a connection problem there. You've frozen again, Councillor Scullion. You're back with us now.
Right, okay. I just put off any other device that is using the internet. Right, Bron, if you want to make a start, I will try and improve my signal. Thank you.
No problem. There were just a couple of things that I wanted to emphasise, and then hopefully the papers are self-explanatory and I'm happy to take any questions. Just wanted to give a bit of reassurance that while you can see we are very much on the advice and guidance side of things at the moment, particularly around the MCA work streams, it's not exclusively advice and guidance. We have got ongoing assurance pieces of work, so we should be in a position come the year end to be able to do an audit opinion with sufficient balance. I know we try to build more advice and guidance into this year's plan, but I didn't want anyone to take away the impression that that's all that we're doing at the moment. Also, just to say, the team is feeling a lot more resilient and flexible now, given that we've managed to recruit the principal auditor post, which was the backfill for all the work we're doing on the adult education budget. So that is allowing us to not just focus on the audit work itself, but also to get our systems, processes and policies in a better state. So again, just making sure that we're picking up all the things that came out of the external quality assessment from last year. So it's a good position to be in. I'm a lot more comfortable with where we are now, and I'm feeling quite positive about the fact that we're getting that balance of work underway. And then the final thing to note is that the plan updates you on what those pieces are that are ongoing, just so that you don't have to take just my word for it. It indicates what we're working on currently, what we will be doing in the final quarter of the year, and those pieces of work that I think the last committee we agreed we were going to defer. So that was it from my point of view. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Any questions from members about the internal audit progress report? Councillor Lee. Councillor Lee, you're still on mute.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. There's a lot in the report, Bronwyn, and I congratulate you on its comprehensive nature. Just is there anything in there that you would like to highlight particularly? Because otherwise it's potentially quite difficult to find everything that one might find otherwise. So just to see if there is anything at all you'd like to tell us about.
I think at the request of the usual chair, Andy, the top three issues I think are the things that I absolutely would pull out. So there is a lot of pressure on the MCA work streams because of the tight deadlines. And I think we're seeing that in the advice and guidance and the amount of work we're doing. I think John would confirm the audit team put a lot into helping with the new ERP system, looking at how. I think the point here is we're trying to make sure that as these MCA work streams are doing stuff in readiness for next May, that we actually build the governance and the controls in at this point. So for us, it is advice and guidance, but it's advice and guidance in order to make stronger controls and governance apparent in the work that's done. So I would just say the tight deadlines are the thing that we need to be just very, very mindful of. The obvious other stuff is the COVID stuff and the impact that it's having. That's not just on the post-recovery plans for the region, but it's also on the business itself and how it's coping with that, with its frontline staff, etc. So those three top issues are the things I would draw out of the work that we're doing.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Bron. I have to say that I noticed in reading the work plan the increasing importance of the MCA work, and I would concur with the usual chair, with Andy, that this is absolutely right and absolutely what we should be doing. And I noticed the bits that have gone on hold in terms of deferred or on hold for the moment, and some of those we would expect to come back. I did note in the report the difficulty, and it's a difficulty that the member councils are also having, and that is to do with consultation in its widest sense, really, in terms of it's a real challenge for us at the moment, really. And I wondered if you wanted to just say a little bit about that, Bronwyn.
That has come up at some of the work that we've done with some of the work streams. I know I don't have a hugely helpful answer on this one, other than to say that as these discussions happen, pragmatism has to be the order of the day, and making sure that we do this as fully as we possibly can. I think it's just a manifestation of the current crisis, really, that everybody is struggling with that. But it does come up at the work streams, and it is discussed, and a lot of due regard is given to what can be done about making sure it's as inclusive as possible, as comprehensive as possible. So I just completely endorse the fact that that is clearly something everyone is having to think long and hard about. But I'm confident that they are doing that. So at least you can take that assurance from where we've had attendance on those work streams.
Okay, if there are no other comments on this progress report, I'd like to just thank Bronwyn and the team very much for the work that we're doing, and we look forward to seeing the results of the current work. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can we move on, folks, then to agenda item 6, external audit progress report. And Angela, I think you're going to introduce this one.
I will, thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is your regular report on whatever range of external audit matters have come to the fore since the last meeting. The first section briefly explains where we got to with the annual accounts, that we had hoped to be in a position to sign this off earlier in the year, and indeed the audit work was largely completed. We picked this up on a later agenda item. There were some delays in external assurances rather than in the internal work, and that is now largely complete, and we'll pick that up under the next agenda item with the external auditors. Some updates there from Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited, PSAA. You were one of the many respondees to the Redmond Review consultation that took place last year, which is come back with quite a range of recommendations that will help shape the future of audit. We set out the summary in paragraph 2.6, and the appendix sets out the fuller conclusions of the review. So it is talking about a new body to oversee and regulate local audit. It is talking about training needed, ensuring that local auditors have the training that they need, looking at the fee structures, which is a topic this committee has considered before, and a number of other functions. I won't go into detail, but I think it's one we'll need to keep a watching brief, because as the rules and regulations change, that will impact on us and on our activities. So we will keep an eye on that and come back to you with any changes that emerge from that. The paragraph 2.7 alerts you to another consultation, which is about fee variations. So at the moment, all fees are agreed via PSAA. If there is a need to change those in year, there is a process where they all have to go back through PSAA. Appendix 2 sets out a consultation that closes next week, asking if, in effect, suggesting that there may be two types of variations, one for something that is common across all audits and one that is more localised, and in effect agreeing a slightly different approach. So there's a question there, if you wish us to prepare a consultation response on your behalf, either in support of that or not, or making any other points you wish. And 2.8 there to just highlight that our engagement lead, Mark Kirkham, this is his final audit with us because he has done his 5 years, and in line with the FRC's ethical standards, he's required to move on to other audits. And he will be passing the baton across to another of his colleagues who has worked for us before, who will be taking over for next year's audit. So the next item on the agenda will be Mark Kirkham's final audit with us. With that, I will pause and happy to take questions on any or all of those points.
Thank you, Angela. And can I just endorse your comments about Mark Kirkham? And thank you, you're on the call. Thank you so much for the work that you've done with us over the last 5 years. And it is absolutely right in terms of good ethical practice to move on for auditors after that time. And I note that your successor is called Mark Dalton. Do you have to be called Mark in order to carry out this particular role with the combined authority? But thank you very much, and we will welcome Mark in due course. In terms of questions to Angela, and clearly you have two appendices here. One, of course, is the Redmond Review that many of you will have seen in other contexts, and I must say that I welcome some of the points in there. In particular, it's not the government is at pains to say a recreation of the Audit Commission, but I think the question of a regulator for quality, particularly in these difficult times for councillors, is something that's very welcome. And I also think the emphasis on training and understanding local authority requirements is one. It is very different from from business, accounting, things like MRP and so on, that it is important that people have that specialist public sector knowledge. And also, I think it is actually very good practice for the external auditors to come and give an annual report to council. Clearly, they usually do to audit committees, but I think it's important to understand how important audit is within the local government processes as a whole. So certainly I welcome much of the Redmond review. I personally don't have any very strong views on the variance in fees in Appendix 2, but I'd be very happy to hear from the committee if they have questions for Angela or particular points to make about this paper. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it was just on the Redmond review. I see it's at Appendix 1. I've not had chance to go through that, I have to admit. So the question for Angela, who no doubt has been through it many times, is if there's anything that you'd like to pick out that you think we should know in particular arising in that report, could you please let us know now, or otherwise, if everything's tickety-boo, we move on.
I think I would, at this stage, it's probably, John, our head of finance here, may have a comment, but from my perspective, I think generally this is indicating where things are going to change and we need to be mindful of it. But as Chair referenced before, this is about ongoing continual improvement to the regime. So it would be hard not to support it. The devil will be in the detail of quite what that means for us. And I think it'll probably become a regular item here as we see this coming through. John was indicating, though, if you're happy to bring him in, Chair.
John Sheard.
Thank you, Chair. No, I agree with what Angela's just said and do support the recommendations. One of the things just to bring out, maybe should have come into the body of the report, was some of these changes in part are going to have to require regulatory or legislative, can never say that word, change. But the review has cited that they are really important changes that do need urgent attention.
Thank you, John. Anything else on this item?
Thank you.
No. Okay, thank you. We will now move on to the annual accounts. And I think, Angela, you're going to kick off on this item, and then I think John's going to come in.
I will. Thank you. Yes, this is the annual accounts. It's a long report. You have covering report. Appendix 1 gives you the final statement of accounts. Appendix 2 is the Treasury Management Statement, which you're also asked to look at. And item 3 is Mazars' audit completion report, which you are required to consider before determining whether you wish to approve the accounts. So if I'll give a very brief overview, and then perhaps if John, who's been closer to the detail, wishes to come in, and then we would usually allow one of the Marks to present the audit completion report and confirm exactly where the auditors have got to. As we alluded to before, we had the bulk of this work done jointly between us all. We were largely there earlier in the year. Since then, the additional external assurances have been sought, but we have not had to make any significant changes to the accounts, either at the point of audit or subsequently. There are some changes set out in the appendix at 3, but from our side, I think the audit went very smoothly, considering the situation in which we found ourselves and having to do the audit remotely. And I think some good work gone on there to ensure we've actually got to a point where we have a set of accounts. The outcome for the year has been well reported elsewhere through the Combined Authority. This is clearly now a historical document looking back, but we did end up with our 1.3 million surplus this year, which was ahead of where we had originally anticipated. The report sets out a number of the items we also need to provide. So the management letter we have ready, and we'll provide that to the auditors after the accounts are approved today. And we hope to yes, get that sorted later today. I think that hand over to John. Is there anything you want to highlight that members need to be particularly aware of in the account?
Yeah, thanks. I'll try not to repeat some of what you've just said, Angela. Useful summary. Yes, they are presented today for approval, subject to the report from Mazars, and I'll hand over to Mark shortly if that's okay, Mark. We are anticipating the unqualified opinion, which is good news. I won't talk about the dates. There was an extension, so the extension is now 30th of November, so we're very close to that. We were well prepared to go to the original dates, but other things have got in the way. The interim audit work we do in February, actually with Mazars, is really, really helpful, and we get a lot of the bulk done during that phase. And I hope that continues because I think it helps both sides. So to the accounts, in the accounts, normal statements are in there. So we have the income and expenditure statement, the balance sheet, the cash flow, and the movement in reserves, all supplied with detailed notes. I certainly don't intend to go through all those. Members will be pleased to hear. So they have been prepared in line with international financial reporting standards, and in line with CIPFA Code of Practice. There are no significant accounting policy changes to tell the committee about since last year. Just a few things to draw out for committee are probably of interest. The accounts have been prepared on a going concern basis, which is probably pertinent in the current climate. It's right to do so, and the auditors are happy with that assessment. We still have key funds in place, for example, the levy from constituent authorities, soon to become a mayoral authority, and we're currently managing the financial impacts of COVID, as hopefully you'll see on the later report on the agenda. We have our pension disclosures. Sometimes the numbers can be quite scary, you see, for pensions, because they usually show us a deficit in the accounts. That's not unusual. It's a snapshot in time is the balance sheet, but you play a longer game on pensions, obviously, and any deficits that need recovering are always adjusted after a 3-year valuation, and usually impacting on the employer's rate if we have to pay a little bit more to get back on track. And property valuations, they've been impacted again by the global markets. We have had assessments done on the property valuations in our balance sheet. It's been done on a basis of material valuation of uncertainty. It's been following valuers' professional guidance. Mazars may draw out on that a little bit in their report, and we'll keep it under constant review during the current year, which we are doing. Nothing else really to say on the annual accounts. I'll let Mazars say. Nothing much more to say on the Treasury Management Statement other than, yes, it covers our borrowing and investment movements. Lists you the outstanding transactions as at the 31st of March, some of the investments and loans which are outstanding, so hopefully members find that useful. In Treasury Management, just to remind committee, we are supported and advised by Leeds City Council in this work, and we have a service level agreement with them, and all those matters are undertaken following the Prudential Code and again CIPFA guidance. Largely, the Leeds have been managing a cash surplus for us, and cash is important. It's not free money. It's money we've had in advance of investments, and so we've got the money. The capital programs just need to finish the work, really. So I think I'll draw a line there, and if committee are happy, I'll hand over to Mark Kirkham to give the audit opinion.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question for Jonathan. It may be for Mark, actually, at Mazars later, but I note that the delay in the accounts has been due to finalising some issues with the pension fund. And, you know, we're right on the limit now, so I hope that enough time has elapsed for those differences to be accounted for. But I do note that in the external reports, there is referred to a material valuation uncertainty of this fund. Now, I'm sure that Mark will want to talk about that. But I wondered if you had any comments on that before we talk to the external auditor. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. It's probably one to defer to Mark, but yeah, we're supported in those valuations by both the West Yorkshire Pension Fund and the actuary they procure to do the exercise. And they've undertaken that work. What the auditors have, I think it's been in the level of assurance the auditors have got behind those numbers, and Mark may be able to, well, I'm sure we'll be able to provide you more information on what they found during the work. What it's not led to is from the accounts we gave to the auditor back in June, is for us to make a change to the figures that are presented to you today. We're happy with the figures are within the boundaries of acceptance, and we've not made any changes to the ones we presented at the start of the audit.
Just on that, and I know we'll be moving on to Mark shortly, but when the external auditors refer to a material valuation uncertainty, material is usually means what it says. So when you say it's within the bounds, what sort of bounds have you used to determine materiality or not?
It's a good question. Again, I'm wondering whether Mark may be better placed to answer that one for you, Councillor Lee, because sometimes it comes down to semantics and wording within an auditor's report. So if you don't mind, I'll let Mark come in. Okay. And if there's still an outstanding matter, I'll come back and address that one.
Thank you, and I'm sure Mark will be able to lead us through the Byzantine ways of valuation of pension funds over 3 years. So, Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and morning, members. I am the External Audit Engagement Lead for the Combined Authority, and as has been said, it's my last audit report. The audit report was actually drafted much earlier in the year, as has been mentioned too, and I've just looked at my file records, and we had a draft almost ready for discussion in July. Now that reflects the really good performance of your finance people, and as has already been said, we were waiting for assurances from other auditors in connection with the material entries in your accounts. But as far as your own finance professionals are concerned, it is a case of very well done and top marks. And on the subject of marks, I am feeling the need to say that being called Mark isn't a key performance indicator at Mazars, though it sometimes might seem like that. Anyway, you can't have too many marks in terms of your audit reports. Enough of that. Looking at the report itself, I'm looking at page 114, which is the executive summary, and that's where we set out our intended conclusions, and at least one of those items in that page need to be updated, so I'll do that in a minute. But as has been said, we do intend to give an unqualified opinion on the accounts and an unqualified value for money conclusion. And the item on this page that needs to be updating is the reference to the National Audit Office and the group instructions. We received instructions early this month, but that was obviously after this report had been prepared. So also on this page is indeed a reference to a slightly unusual audit opinion, because it does refer to material valuation uncertainty in two respects. So that's not, when I say unusual, it's unusual for an external audit report, but this year it isn't unusual for combined authorities and local authorities to have these references in their audit reports. And that's because of the circumstances that we found ourselves in as a result of the public health emergency that's been taking place for most of the year. So because those material valuation uncertainties involve some of the areas that we'd identify as significant risks in our audit plan, and Mark Outside is also on the call and he'll take you through the findings in connection with those significant risks. I'm going to hand over to, yes, I know it's another Mark, but I do feel the need to do that because the report is actually based on Mark's work. So I'll hand over to Mr. Outside now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark Kirkham. As Mark said, I'm Mark Outside and I'm the engagement manager for West Yorkshire Combined Authority. So I will take you through the rest of the report, starting at page 4, where we've listed the outstanding areas of work. Those were as at the time of writing the report, and I can say that those have been cleared without any issues. Pages 5 onwards provide a commentary on the significant risks.
Mark, can I just clarify, because of course the report is in a wider pack, and we've been basically going from page 114 to 115 onwards from those, and if you look, there's very small page numbers there on the left-hand side if you're struggling to find the exact point that Mark's referring to. Sorry to interrupt, Mark.
It's okay. I can't see the agenda pack while I've got the Zoom on, so I'm having to refer to my own report. I do apologise. But page 5 onwards provides a commentary on the significant risks that we identified as part of our audit planning. The first of those was management override of controls, and I'm pleased to say that we've not reported any issues in that regard. The second significant risk that we had highlighted in our planning was around the valuation of land and buildings, this being a standard risk across all of our clients. And as we've already discussed, we've highlighted that we've included an emphasis of matter paragraph within our conclusion in regard to this, but that is not saying that we've got any issues with the valuations in your property. The third risk that we highlight is around the pension asset, the pension liability valuation. And again, we found no issues with regard to the work that we've completed. However, as we've already discussed, there's an emphasis of matter paragraph within our audit opinion. On page 8 of our pack, we've highlighted the significant matters that we've discussed with management as part of the audit. The most significant being the impact of COVID-19 in terms of going concern and the impact on valuations. And secondly, to get resolution over the McLeod and Goodwin cases in regard to pension funds. Page 9 of our report highlights the rationale for the emphasis of matter, but it's worth noting that as at the time of writing the report, we hadn't concluded on the pension fund emphasis of matter, but that has now been resolved and is now in the audit opinion. On page 11, we have detailed a control recommendation, and this was around the level of detail pertaining to the yellow buses that the Combined Authority has. And basically, it's just around the granularity of the information held within the asset register that we hope will make accounting and auditing a particular asset a bit easier in future. On pages 12 to 14, we provide an update on the prior year's control issues. I'm pleased to say that those have been resolved. Pages 15 to 16 provides members with a list of audit findings and adjustments. And I'm pleased to say that there's nothing particularly in there that's worth writing home about. Most of them are of disclosure in nature, so nothing to worry members around. On page 17 onwards, we provide a commentary on our value for money conclusion, with page 20 being the summary of the risk, which was around financial sustainability. And in common with most public sector organisations, we've obviously commented around the impact of COVID and that is ongoing, but at the same time, we have not highlighted any issues around your controls and your procedures around financial sustainability. Page 21 onwards is the appendices to the report, and that includes our draft management letter and our draft opinion. And last but not least, page 27 confirms that we've got no independence issues with the authority. So that concludes our audit completion report. It's quite vanilla other than those emphasis of matter paragraphs. And we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Just before I bring Councillor Lee in, I have to say that reading the report, and when I saw that there was one issue highlighted, and I thought, aha, and I turned over the page to discover it was the way in which yellow buses were recorded as assets. I was slightly disappointed, but very pleased, really, very pleased. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I hesitate to say full marks, but there we are, I've said it. Yes, just a question. You refer to something that I've never heard of, but I take it it's important, otherwise you wouldn't have referred to it. Could you just give us an insight into the cases of MacLeod and Goodwin and how we should think of them or otherwise? Thank you.
That's a good question, Councillor. In terms of Goodwin, this was a case going back a few years, and if memory serves correctly, it was something to do with how pensions were awarded to particular, I think it was members of the legal service, and there was a resolution issued this year as to how pension funds should resolve the Goodwin, the MacLeod issue. In the past, we've got resolution on it, but there was initial guidance issued, which meant that we had to consider that resolution this year, and thankfully there was no material impact. And Goodwin is a similar issue in regard to a case that's been brought against the pension funds, and it is being resolved at the moment, but we consulted with the actuary to make sure that there was no material impact for West Yorkshire Pension Fund, which there wasn't.
Thank you for that.
Did you have another question, Stephen? Councillor Lee?
Well, it was just to say thank you and to question whether it was worth mentioning them. Maybe they were more trouble than they were worth.
I suspect we'd rather have our auditors mention everything, even if it's very, very tiny, just in the interests of transparency. Any other questions for anybody called Mark on this call? No, I'm not seeing anything. Can I then, before we go on to do the formal part of this, thank everybody for their work on this. It hasn't been an easy year to do this work, as we have already indicated. And thank you to the officers of the Combined Authority and their advisors and leads in terms of the work that they did to make sure that the majority of this was actually completed very early. And refer members back to page 3 or page 114 in terms of the executive summary. It's an unqualified opinion on the financial statements, and the value for money conclusion likewise provides us with some assurance that things are being well managed and going in the right direction. So if I could then move on back to the actual recommendations for this, which I shall find in a moment, in terms of what this committee has to do. You'll have seen that we had statement of accounts, the Treasury Management Statement, which I'm glad to see is cautious in view of the volatility in the system at the moment, and the Audit Completion Report. So in your main cover report, 6.1, we are asked to, first of all, approve the Treasury Management Statement. It's recommended that the Treasury Management Statement be recommended for approval. Let's take each of these. There are 3 of them, one by one. Are members of the committee content to approve the Treasury Management Statement?
Yes.
I'm not seeing any dissension. I'm seeing nods. I have to say I cast an eye over the short-term borrowing and was very pleased to see there was nothing for Croydon or Northamptonshire or anywhere like that. Okay. Item 2. And the recommendations that Mazars' audit completion report be considered. I think we have considered that, so agreed. And then finally, that the committee approve the attached annual accounts for the year ended 31st of March 2020. Are the committee content to approve the accounts as set out?
Yes.
No.
Yep. Yep. Seeing all the nods, those recommendations are now finalised. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all. If we can move on then to mayoral combined authority preparations. And I know that Andy Clayton, as the usual chair, was particularly keen to see this come forward. I think that's you, Angela, to introduce this item.
It is, thank you. And you're right, it was a conversation at the last meeting, I think recognising how significant this piece of work is, that there was a request for us to bring back some assurance to this committee that work is underway, that will ensure we have all the necessary processes, decision-making, practical steps in place for next May, on the basis that the order does indeed progress and gets made into law in the early new year. I won't dwell too much on it. What I'll draw out is that the report gives you a bit of context around what the deal involves, confirms that we have got a programme running with a number of 20 work streams within it, set out in Appendix 1, hopefully show the breadth of work underway to make sure that we are considering all aspects of this. Some good progress has been made, not least the progress of the order, which is almost been approved by every local authority and ourselves. We are the final ones this afternoon. There is much other work's happened on the adult education budget, which the internal audit team has been heavily involved in. And paragraph 2.4 sets out some of the other areas where good progress has been made. I would probably mention specifically that there's a number of items around the organisation that we are doing. So things like the integrated corporate systems, so a new finance HR system, and that's been out to tender, that is making good progress. There is work around the HR side of things, making sure the organisation is the right shape. There's work around the finances, around the single investment fund. Those principles have been agreed at Combined Authority, and more will come back soon. Police and Crime Commissioner transfer is a huge work stream in its own right, and some good working relationships established there with the PCC and West Yorkshire Police. And a piece of work we've had done that's confirmed that it is possible, is challenging, but it is something we can complete. Decision-making and committee arrangements at paragraph 214 and 215 to flag that we will be bringing some of those proposals back through this committee. There obviously has to be a review of how current decision-making operates and how that is changed by the mayor. So there are some new functions that obviously need new decision-making, and how does bringing the mayor in affect what we have in place? Clearly that is, for a committee that is about governance, something this committee should be looking at. So we'll be bringing that back in the new year to you. Beyond that, I think there's lots more information about the specific work streams. Happy to take any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you, Angela. And you're right, as governance and audit, we should certainly be looking very closely at the future governance arrangements. And it's going to be complicated, and we do that alongside scrutiny. I know we've got overview and scrutiny as the next item on the agenda. Any specific questions for Angela? Sorry, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Just one concern that's been expressed in discussions we've been having about this. We've got this terrible situation with COVID, and hopefully things will be largely resolved by May. Who knows? But what contingency plans do we have if anything should interfere with the election of a mayor in May? How would we progress things otherwise?
Okay, I think there's probably two parts to that. One is our PCs, the mayoral election is running in parallel with your local elections. So if the mayor doesn't get elected, then the local elections don't happen. I think there's been a very clear message come out that whatever, the elections will happen next year, that they cannot be rolled over again. And we are in contact with the Electoral Commission about the measures that they're recommending that are taken. So we are optimistic that arrangements will be put in place that will enable it to happen whatever state we're in with COVID. A second part to that is the order when it comes in. Some of it will be coming to play immediately, and the Combined Authority can pick up and run with. Some of the order only happens when the mayor comes in. There will be some provisions if the mayor is, the position of mayor is vacant at that point, because that may occur anyway during the year for reasons outside of anyone's control. So there would be contingency arrangements in place. But we are definitely getting the message that local elections will happen next year, and therefore the mayoral ones should be safe as well.
Thank you, Angela, and I can certainly support what has been said. I understand that the government did look very seriously at the possibility of perhaps pushing the elections on to later towards the summer in terms of being more safely past COVID risk and concern, but the message is now that the government are very, very clear that nothing will stand in the way of the elections happening in May. So I would say that is very likely to happen. And we shall see where we are. We shall see where we are by May. Any other questions or comments on the preparations for the Combined Authority? Sorry, the mayoral. I must get used to it, the MCA, the Mayoral Combined Authority. No, I think, Angela, if the committee will support this, I think that actually it would be useful just to have this as a short standing item, just to under those headings, if the committee are happy with that. Okay, can we agree to note the report then? Okay, thank you. The next item is the Overview and Scrutiny Committee update. And I think, Andrew, you may want to introduce this, but a welcome to Councillor Harrand, who I think is wishing to say something. And I think this is once again an item that Andy, and I'm sorry he can't be here today, Andy Clayton, the chair, is very keen to make sure that the work of the Governance and Audit Committee is properly aligned with the work of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So I'll hand over to you, Angela.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You're absolutely right. This is something that Andy Clayton, as Chair, has been very focused on, making sure that the work of Governance and Audit is aligned with that of scrutiny, and we don't, if there are areas of mutual concern, that each side is aware of what's happening, and if there are, making sure there's nothing disappears between the gaps. There has been work underway. The Overview and Scrutiny Committee were asked to consider what their thoughts were on a future scrutiny, for that to go back to be considered by the Combined Authority in terms of the wider decision making and new structures. So a brief update in the paper here of where that thinking has got to. It still needs to go back to the Combined Authority for their consideration in due course. Councillor Harrand has offered to come along today as chair of the committee if there are any questions that anyone would like to put to him on the paper that you've got here today.
Councillor Harrand.
Thank you. Yes, it's probably worth a couple of minutes. It is indeed, this is requested by Councillor Clayton. The report looks back and looks forward. I'm not going to read it out to you, but looking backwards is the work we've done this last year on various aspects of things, and the problems caused by COVID and the effect that's had on reserves and budgets. But that's all there for you to read. Perhaps the second part is more interesting and more important. That looks at what we're going to look, what scrutiny will look like in the next year and after the election of the mayor. We've had discussions about it. We had a working group, looked at alternative provision in other mayoral combined authorities and regional devolved authorities. We came up with three possible options, which took to the committee last week, and adopted the one which is the nearest thing to a select committee, which would be one major committee, high profile, we trust, focusing on big picture stuff, supported by 5 permanent subgroups who will oversee certain scrutiny functions and will have a system of spokespersons to specialise and to represent scrutiny on other panels as observers. The point I really want to make is that scrutiny after next May is nothing like, is completely different from scrutiny before next May. The budget of the Combined Authority will be equal to the revenue budget of Leeds City Council, and we can't scrutinise that with, as we are at the present resources, which is one man. The new scrutiny will have to look bigger, will inevitably cost more. It'll be a significant expansion, and not just the 10%, oh, it's a bit different, we need a little bit more. Extra resources are going to be absolutely necessary, and we look to you to support us as we identify them and take our case to the Combined Authority. I'll not go through the version that we are inclined to recommend. Carl Ed can answer questions at it appropriately, but we do value your opinions, and we may look to you to advocate our case for us when the need for resources is identified. There may be people who need convincing. We may ask you to help us do that convincing. I do take the point about integration of governance and audit with overview scrutiny. It may well be that's not been adequate in the past. So perhaps we could have more regular reporting between ourselves on that part of the structure of the Combined Authority. It's all going to change. It's all going to be different. It's all going to be more demanding of resources, but it's all going to be necessary. Questions, please.
Thank you, Councillor Harrand. Questions, comments on the options looked at? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm a great believer in governance and audit and scrutiny functions. I think they're absolutely essential. And my contention is that, we should always be running the business in such a manner, or the organisation, in such a manner that the audit doesn't bring gasps of fear from people. They should be welcomed, because that's how you keep a business running smoothly and efficiently. And if you're running it properly, there's no fears from an auditor coming in to have a look at what's happening. But on this proposal, I'm sure you've considered it, Councillor Harrand, but I just feel I must mention this. Is there a case for the separation of these things? Is it better that scrutiny works independently of audit? Because if you do merge the two together, and I'm not saying I'm against that, I'm posing the question. You've got the two powers conjoined, and there is an argument for keeping them separated. So I just pose that question.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that's not in dispute. Yes, we must keep them separately. There's no danger about that. We need to talk to each other, but the remit of each committee is substantially different. And we'll be aware of your point, but I think we recognise the trap and we won't fall into that one. Thank you.
I think probably, Councillor Harrand, you used the word integration, where I actually think you meant alignment. I think it's very important that governance and audit committees and scrutiny committees are in alignment in terms of wanting to improve the organisations. But I think integration, as you rightly say, would be a trap to fall into, because actually we need different perspectives and independent perspectives. And the independent members of this audit committee are valued in terms of the perspectives that they bring to this. So thank you for that. May I ask a question in terms of, I'm quite interested in how you looked at the other combined authorities, and without naming names, if there were particular practices that you thought that's really very good, but maybe not for us, or that's really not the line that we want to go down, without naming names.
Khaled's better qualified to answer this. He did the research for me. So, Khaled, do you want to summarise that? There were some problems we identified and avoided.
Yeah. Combined authority scrutiny is still relatively primitive, I'd say, in the sense that combined authority is relatively new, scrutiny, combined authority is relatively new, and so most combined authorities still retain just having one overview and generalist overview and scrutiny committee. The only one that's slightly different is Greater Manchester, which has 4 overview and scrutiny committees, including health scrutiny, which comes under their powers that other combined authorities don't have. They're slightly different in that sense. But generally speaking, our research showed that the problems were mainly sort of cultural rather, and systemic rather than based on structure, if that makes sense. So the problem is when the issue rather is when these regional mayoral authorities were created, the position of mayor, etc., was created, but based on the London model, but the London Assembly aspect wasn't carried over. And so what's happened in a sense is that the local scrutiny models have just been imposed at a regional level, and there isn't a lot of understanding really that this works very well. The concept of a regional scrutiny body has to operate necessarily very differently to a local one. And so our challenge as scrutiny, and the challenge of all combined authority scrutinies, first of all, is lower resource compared to how it might be resourced at a local authority. It's usually because combined authorities are funded a bit differently to how local authorities, so there's less money basically. But that in that sense, it creates a second problem, which is the way scrutiny is done. They're trying to replicate how it's done at a local level, which is far more focused and detailed, whereas on a regional level needs to be more strategic. That word is always thrown around, and more big picture, as we said. And I think our proposals and our options sort of took that into consideration. That's the lessons we learned.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And we look forward to, under the mayoral combined authority, the MCA, seeing the 5 subgroups and the specialist work that they do, as well as the option 1, the enhanced select committee. Anything you want to add, Councillor Harrand?
Yes, I just make the point that I say to people that are meeting bus queues, if we don't get it right now, there'll be no appetite for change after next May. The elected mayor won't see enhancing scrutiny as a big priority when he or she is in place. So if we're a nuisance and then we natter on and we bore you with what's necessary between now and next May, we do not apologise. Because if we don't get it right now, we won't get it wrong. We won't get it right for 3 or 4 years after that. We apologise in advance.
There's no need for apologies in trying to get it right. And I think work that we put in now in terms of setting up the mayoral combined authority and how things work, as we saw in an earlier report, there's a lot to do and we need it to be as good as we can. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Okay, if we could move on then, we note that report, members, and move on to item 10, which is compliance and monitoring. Angela.
Yeah, thank you. Again, this is the regular report you get to each meeting, running through a number of internal control areas. The first section 2.2 onwards, page 161, just to confirm there are no changes to internal controls. Our regulatory compliance board meets and considers a wide range of assurances that come from across the organisation and monitor any actions that arise as a result. Under Treasury Management, at the top of the next page, the Chair mentioned Croydon earlier. Just to note there that we do currently have a 5 million exposure to Croydon. The reassurance is that the Section 114 notice means that they should still be in a position to repay this when it matures next year. What's been put into place is an arrangement to ensure the council continues to be able to operate and fulfil its obligations. So we are assured that our money is is safe and is outside of that notice, that they are obliged to pay that, and that should happen next year. We'll advise you if that changes. The key indicators, with reporting there for one further RIDDOR, all other controls up to date. Financial monitoring, revenue budget's been very well covered at the Combined Authority recently. The pandemic has created a funding gap that we're working to close, and there's a report going to the meeting next week on the budget. We will be bringing something back on the budget to your January meeting before it goes on to the February meeting. This meeting having been rescheduled from October, so you have two in quite quick succession. But we'll bring that budget back through you next year, early next year, which will cover the current financial year and how we're going to set next year's budget. So we're underway with business planning, with what we need to put in place to become mayoral combined authority, and then to actually deliver the expectations and requirements once we get past the election next year. It's a really challenging world to be setting budgets, and I know you're all going through the same challenges at your local authorities. And we are in discussion with your local authorities about the pressures, the difficulties, and we are doing our best to keep focus on keeping our costs down and trying to understand how we can best utilise the additional funding coming in as part of the devolution deal to help support necessary work across the region. Risk management at paragraph 223, the latest strategic headline risks are in the appendix. They're unchanged from last time. They do cover quite a breadth of risk areas. Obviously, COVID remains there. The EU exit has been a high level risk and remains one. The future funding remains a risk. I suspect these will continue on our risk register for some time, but there are some of the actions we are doing to mitigate those highlighted in the report. So I think you've got the current year budget monitoring in Appendix 1, the current year capital spend in Appendix 2, which is a little lower than where we might want it to be, but actually is holding up reasonably well given the pandemic and the impact that's had on project delivery. And then Appendix 3 is your corporate risk register as discussed. So happy to take any questions on any of those points. Thank you.
Any questions for Angela? Councillor Lay.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question, Angela, if I may. I was actually quite surprised to see that we have any exposure to difficulties in Croydon. Croydon and West Yorkshire, you know, I would have thought could only really have tenuous connections. I may be wrong there, but I just couldn't imagine that we would be having any exposure to that. So the question is, first of all, I'm interested as to how that exposure came around. You know, where did that 5 million exposure arise? But also just ask if there are any other large amounts of money potentially exposed to other councils that might not be as prudent as we are in their financial management, just so that we know what might be up the road if things do turn badly. And in business, somebody once told me, don't ever imagine it can't get worse, because it can. So we have to take into account all of these things. And so I'm quite interested, how on earth did we allow Croydon to owe us £5 million?
I think I'll leave Angela or possibly John to unfold the ways in which local authorities across the country actually allow each other to have short-term loans in terms of managing the lumpiness of cash flow. And then you'll see on page 109 in the Treasury Management Report, a list in terms of fixed-term deposits and so on. I can assure you, Councillor Lee, in terms of common practice of managing money, and indeed in our own council, in terms of treasury management, it is perhaps not a good idea to have cash lying at bank, making absolutely no interest at all, rather than having it circulating and bringing in a small return. But I'll leave Angela and John to provide some further information.
Can I thank you for your comments, Chair? I did ask Angela the question, obviously, but can I assure you that I've very great knowledge of financial management issues? Thank you.
Chair, I apologise if I implied otherwise. Angela.
Thank you both. A fair question and a helpful summary there from the Chair in terms of the way the local authority treasury management works. There is always a balance between what we do with cash. We are currently in a situation where we have surplus cash, due largely to the way in which capital grants in particular are paid to us. It is unsafe to keep it all in one place, and the balance of treasury management is how best to protect the funds and ideally generate a return, but actually our priority is to protect them. And in protecting it, we have in place a strategy that is about spreading the risk around. So we have an approved lending list, and at the moment, as you'll see from the treasury management, most of our short-term treasury management investments are indeed with local authorities. There was a point when they used to be with international banks, and following financial issues there, they fell off the approved list. We used to do it with British banks. They also fell off the list, and local authorities are currently deemed one of the safest places to put funding in these short-term arrangements. Recognise that councils are in difficult positions. I think it's sort of underpinned by would the government ever allow a local authority to be bankrupt? And on that basis, it feels slightly safer. I think what we could probably do for you, Councillor, we usually do each year a bit of a more in-depth look at treasury management, and we haven't yet been able to do that this year. So I wonder whether we do that for you at the January meeting and just go through some of those principles. You'll find what we're doing here is in line with most other local authorities, and there is a very busy industry of short-term treasury management arrangements between local authorities with limits on time, limits on the amount, and limiting our exposure to one counterparty at any point.
Thanks, Angela. I would like to see how those decisions are arrived at. Is there a point system for assessing the finances of these other local authorities? You know, I can't immediately imagine why somebody here would view Croydon as a safer haven for our money than here.
Well, if that's all right with you, Chair, we'll bring something back next time to explain the ways in which we, like other authorities, spread that money around, and the controls and decision-making arrangements in place to make sure it's done within the Prudential Code and the requirements that we are obliged to meet.
Thank you, Angela. And thank you, Councillor Lee, for the question. And I think that would be very helpful to have something at the January meeting. Anything else to say on compliance and monitoring? Nope. Okay, can we note that report, please, committee? And then finally, an item that some of us have seen before, which is item 11, the Assurance Framework Review 2020. Who is going to lead on this, Angela? Ian Pegg has come along. He's been doing the difficult work on pulling this together. So as Councillor Scullion explained, this has been to a number of our committees. This is, I think, maybe it's the last committee before it gets finally approved, Ian. But over to you, if that's all right, and you can explain where we've got to with it.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me along. This is the last but one committee. We have combined authority on the 10th of December for final sign-off. And if I just give a little bit of background as to how we've got to where we are with it, and then if there's any questions, that would be good. So as some may be aware, as part of the devolution deal, we were asked to revise our assurance frameworks, come in line with mayoral combined authority rules and regulations as set out in the national guidance. This has given us opportunity to review how our framework worked and how we put our projects through the framework to make sure that we got transparency and challenge in there and that they met our strategic need within our region. One of our big concerns was that this framework has been in place since 2015, and at the time it was a one-size-fits-all framework. We were getting a number of comments from colleagues in the local authorities that we work with closely. So we undertook a consultation back in the early summer where we had over 250 engagements through surveys and workshops. The key things that came out of that survey consultation was that 80% of respondents were supportive of having a framework in place that was transparent and that set the guide for how schemes should be progressed. There were some comments around duplication and around how one size does not fit all and the complexity and process that we put schemes through, including timescales. Taking all this into consideration, we have revised the framework in line with the national guidance, but taking those comments on board. Now, the key changes to the framework, as I've just stated, are removing duplication where it's needed. We have had to reference within there the new mayor's role and remit and how decision making will be made when the mayor is in place. We have to make sure there is a checklist that is given to us to cover the National Local Growth Assurance Framework. We have to make sure that has been met and that it references the key points in there. And it's important to note in revising this framework that we are now trying to put in place not just a framework but alter the way in which we deliver our schemes in terms of consideration and making sure that the process runs smoother through changing the back office systems in terms of templates and how our local authorities report to us. As I said, we have to provisionally submit this on the 1st of December, but we have an agreement from government that final submission will not be until after the Combined Authority meeting on the 10th of December. And then there'll be a period where government review the document and will challenge some of our understanding if they think that we haven't met some of the guidance, which I'm sure we have. And this framework will come into play once the order has been placed. And there are two sides to the framework. There is the bit that runs from the order being placed until we have a mayor, and then we will revise some of it to take on board the mayor's responsibilities following that election. We are right at the end of the process. We are going through final checks as we speak over this weekend with any final comments, but I would welcome any comments from the committee in terms of the framework itself. Thank you.
Ian, any comments from the committee on this? Some of you will have seen it in other settings. Certainly, I've found on the investment committee that the assurance framework and the stages that you have to, or hooks that you have to jump through, make sure that no proposal goes any further forward without having been thoroughly examined and examined again. So I can provide assurance on that. Any other comments? I'm not seeing any hands, and you will see in the paper that there has already been informal feedback received from BIS. So I think that's helpful to have that tucked away as well. So recommendations on this item are at 7.1. Governance and Audit Committee are asked to note the progress and the changes that have been made to the content and structure of the document, and we've we've heard from Ian that there will be more to come when the Mayor is elected. There'll have to be further adjustments. I expect we'll come back to this committee and to provide any comments and feedback. Are the committee content to note the progress made on this? I think, Ian, it's time to send this document on its way, finally.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a long haul over the last couple of months to get this right and to make sure that we fully support the evolution and what's going on, the Mayor. We're nearly there. But thank you very much for your support, everyone, and thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you very much for your work, Ian, and good to meet deadlines. I think that's the last item on the agenda, Angela, and our next meeting is in January. Can I thank the officers and the members of the committee for their contributions. Have a good weekend, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.